And listen, it's not just media companies. Every brand is in the attention economy. You have to keep your customers' attention. They have to be thinking about you. It's just the nature of capitalism. We're just, as consumers, we're getting more savvy to it. So again, driving to that, building tools that reduces friction, that creates an ease of use, that provides benefit to the customer. It's a no-brainer.
Hey, everybody, I'm Bret Kinsella, host of the Voicebot Podcast and also the founder of Voicebot.ai. And every year I get the pleasure of doing year-in review interviews with some industry experts. And this is one of my favorite things we're doing. This is 6th year in a row. And the industry has grown so much over the years that we do multiple of these. So we already did the consumer edition. Now we're going to do the enterprise edition. And it's not just me. I've got some guests here who know the industry really well, who are going to share their thoughts. First, we have Susan Westwater. Susan, say hello.
Hello. Happy to be here.
Great to have you, Susan of Vixen Labs. And we have Jason Fields from Voicify.
Good day, everybody.
Hey, Jason. And Braden Ream from Voiceflow. Braden, thank you.
Bret, good to be here.
Okay. We've had a really busy year. We're going to get right into it. And one of the things that, as we were talking about preparing for this, we started to think about, well, how is voice AI being used in the enterprise? And I think 3 or 4 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago, depending on who's here, when we first got to know each other, these were like ideas about how it would be used in the enterprise. Now there's actual real use cases. And there's a few that really stood out this year. And I think first and foremost, I would say that the contact center is one of the ones that is the most, it actually advanced the most over the last couple of years. So if we talk about the contact center, I think there's a few concepts that we want to discuss. First, I'll just use this as a placeholder, Microsoft and Nuance. So Microsoft's been acquired Nuance, we thought, like 2 years ago, but it actually didn't close until earlier this year. Nuance is a perfect example of a voice-first company that has that's really carved out a space for itself in the contact center, as well as healthcare and some other areas. We also have companies like Unifor, which raised $400 million. But what's really important here is contact center space from a technology standpoint is really large, and it's typically been dominated by what we call the telecom side of the business, as opposed to the voice or conversational AI side of this business. And this year is a year when we really saw the conversational AI part of the business become, I would say, production grade. And actually, I'm going to ask you first, Braden, because you do a lot of work in this space. What are your thoughts on it?
I think what we're seeing is the automation layer is just becoming increasingly important, right? So as you mentioned before, it was really about the integrations, the telephony. But now the sort of advancement of NLU, the advancement of sort of the automation tech in general is allowing for just an increase in how much you can actually automate, right? So maybe a couple of years ago, it was only going to be a couple of key queries that were coming in. But now, given the rise of conversation design, of NLU, you can automate a lot, to the point where, how we think about this at Voiceflow is there's really 2 types of assistants. You're going to have the automation layers, which is, there's always going to be that human side of it in the contact center. It's passing off. And now, and we're going to chat a little bit about this today, you've got like full end-to-end automation, right? There is no human. It's, not meant to even hand off to an agent. You're seeing that a lot in like the drive-throughs and stuff like that. So it's exciting. I think largely though, it's driven by just the explosion of NLU, right? Like 5 years ago, a lot of companies were still, primarily relying on touch tone and things like that. Now you're starting to see more freeform inputs and, things that are enabled by NLU. So that's how we're seeing it. It's quite exciting to see that automation layer grow.
Well, I think the maturation of this industry has been particularly important for you, because I think about what people were doing 2 or 3 years ago. They were implementing these chatbot solutions over the weekend, and there wasn't really that big a need to design. I mean, they had to do some design, but it wasn't like it is today, because you talk about that end-to-end automation. You not only have to have something that's competent from a conversational standpoint, you also have to integrate with a bunch of back-end systems, or else you can't actually fulfill whatever the customer need is.
Yeah, well, it was less of a life cycle, right? So now, because these are seen as core products, there's a life cycle built around it, right? There's a workflow, there's a dedicated team. Maybe 5-10 years ago, when these things were implemented, it was sort of, implement it once, one and done. Maybe we'll check up on it quarterly. now, there are teams that are doing 2-week sprints. 2-week sprints be good in the enterprise, but ideally a 2-week sprint from an iteration loop where you're constantly looking at transcript data. Where's the bot falling down? Where could we get better? And actually being able to ship updates quickly. So it's starting to view your customer experience like a core product, not an afterthought, right? It doesn't just have to be a cost center. It can actually be a competitive advantage to offer a better customer experience. So I think, that mentality shift is what's now being realized, and that being paired with the technology now kind of being there is what's giving to this explosion of conversation design. This title didn't even exist 3 years ago. Now suddenly you're seeing it pop up all over the Fortune 500, and that's just one title of the larger sort of conversational AI team that you're seeing grow within these enterprises, where they're managing that full life cycle end to end, and they're viewing it like a product.
Yeah, fair enough. Susan, you started out actually working much more on the marketing side, I think, in the voice space. But how is that coming together with customer support, contact center? What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, I mean, we were even talking about it before. Of there's been a whole shift, and this actually it's interesting because marketing and customer experience, they have to hold hands, and that's often many times where we're ending up. And so that's where we're seeing, how do we unlock knowledge sharing? How do we break down the silos that then are important from a content perspective, so that it's actually accessible to not just the actual end user of my audience, but actually my own employees? How do we facilitate that we're not doing the same thing twice? Because automation's amazing, but if you're doing the same tasks over and over again, then you're never going to realize the value of it. So it's a matter of understanding, how do we connect not just all the dots in voice, but it's all of the dots across the organization from an enterprise, and how does it unlock? And part of that is fueled by the fact that as consumers, our clients are getting used to a certain level of service that they get as a consumer, that they're like, well, why can't I have that in my office? Why can't I use that convenience or any of that expedience and automation elsewhere? So then that's where we're also starting to see some of those things come through, but definitely for the contact center, because it just kind of, in all honesty, if it's repeatable, then by all means, it's something. And if the experience gets good enough that people aren't offended that you've handed them off to a robot, then it's fine. Then you're able to do that, and it's able to. Back in the day, I can actually remember listening to Nestle's IVR calls all the time, and we'd hear customer service. If we, by taking that into, like Braden, you're talking about being able to read that every 2 weeks and do something about it, as opposed to having to have a powwow once a month. That's amazing ability for us to be just more nimble.
Well, Susan, I really quickly want to build on your point. I think what you said is really interesting around, as long as it's good enough, then everything will be automated. And when you really think about the industry that we're all in, yeah, it's conversational AI, but it's the talking to people industry, right? Mm-hmm. And ultimately, as the technology gets better, everything that can be automated will be automated, as long as it maintains that quality bar. And that's just the technology. As the technology gets better, the number of use cases today, it's contact center. Now we're seeing it drive through. We're seeing it kind of all the stuff we're going to talk about today. But probably entry-level sales at some point, legal, really any industry where it's being able to use natural language as an interface and access data, it will be automated. So
yeah, absolutely. Real estate's even using it. So yeah, it's definitely just growing, but it has to prove itself every time.
Totally.
Bret,
I think you're muted there.
Hey, Susan, you mentioned this idea around expectations. So we have this idea of consumer expectations about what do they expect the quality of a chatbot, voice assistant, whatever to be. But you also mentioned the idea of the executives in the organization who are buying these systems. They have an expectation now. What voice experience is setting those expectations?
So it's very interesting. And we would love to think that it was all of our brilliant actions and skills and those things, but a lot of times it's text to speech. It's a lot of those simple things, in-car assistance, any of those particular delivering off of that, all of those everyday things. There's a lot of times, and we even saw this in the VCI research of, there's a lot of ways that people are interacting with AI. They just don't realize it. And then that uncovers it of, well, what if it's it's not a magical black box? Here's the things behind it. And when we talk about expectations, though, I think the big query we're getting is the ethical questions that then immediately follow. Oh, that's amazing. And it does my heart some good to know that the next question is, should we? A lot sooner we're asking that question than we did in past technology. But it is that whole, but I mean, in all honesty, it's a selfish of how much risk am I putting myself in if I'm putting this much control over, or, even like we saw Getty is even hesitating and saying, I'm not sure, we're not going to allow AI generated artwork. It gets down into those, we jump right into that when we start with data exchanges and things like that. And Jason, I know you can talk a lot more about the things that the way your tires get kicked. It is all of those things of, can you promise me that it'll be good enough, but it'll be safe enough that I'm not going to be risking a relationship or a lawsuit to be able to be made an example of, so that I'm getting all the benefits and I'm not taking nearly the dangerous risk that then I'll have to answer to shareholders for.
Yeah, I think the sophistication and maturity of the technology that you guys are specifically talking to has enabled a higher level of trust by senior executives in the enterprise. And I think that, coupled with the fact that 3, 4, 5 years ago, the conversations that we were all having were about novelty and innovation and not about business value and business use case and driving revenue or efficiency, that tide has shifted. It's not shocking to me that the call center call center deflection, automation, IVR is the place where this is getting traction this year, because when you shift over to something that needs to prove itself, a channel that was already responsible for a conversation naturally would be a place where it can prove itself very quickly. Mm-hmm. And I think we'll see that as a theme repetitively in our conversation today in other industries, where the places that they're putting it are places where conversation was a business critical mechanism for success. Now that the technology is matured enough, people are willing to give it a go. I think it's also worth noting that as a consumer or consumers, this technology, for some reason, even more so than ones in the past, is being forgiven quite a bit for being wrong or bad. And so the risk is even lower for the enterprise to give it a go because of that level of forgiveness by the consumer, as long as, to Braden's point, as long as they treat it as a core product that they're going to make better, you can overcome that with the consumer very quickly.
Don't you think part of that forgiveness is everyone wants something other than the call center agent experience? And it's not that the call center agents are bad when you get to them, although many of them are, because they're undertrained. They've only been on the job for 3 weeks because there's so much turnover, all these things that happen. They don't have the right tools in order to be successful. But it's also because you have to wait so long. And if you can get something solved really quickly, consumers will take anything.
Yeah. Well, and I think that the conversations that we have at the enterprise level, specifically in this area, is it all starts with an audit of what is happening with the existing call center with the reps. What is the low-lying or low-hanging fruit that you can grab onto? There's generally an 80-20 rule. 80% of the stuff that people are calling into is very basic, highly repetitive. Costs a lot more money to have a human do it than if they were to get on their app or log into a website, but people don't always want to do that. They still have a level of comfort with that call center experience. If you give them an option to do that in advance of having to wait a long time online, or even talk to a human, which a lot of other humans don't want to do, regardless of whether it's immediate or they had to wait 10 minutes, they're going to take it. They're going to be happy with it.
I on the 80-20 there, I think what's funny, especially with contact centers, every customer always thinks that their issue is unique. And so therefore they always try to get to a human as fast as possible, because I understand by the data, sure, 80-20, but have you seen, I had this happen and this happened, this happened. This is probably the very first time in your company's history that, someone's had this issue. And so I think a lot of it actually just comes down to, can you design the experience in such a way where it has, I don't want to say empathy, but sort of the markings of empathy in the conversation, where it feels like, okay, hold up, this actually sounds like it might be able to help me. Maybe I'll give the bot a chance before I just try to instantly break it and, get into the fallback intent and talk to a human. Because if you just offer people 3 generic questions and, it doesn't really feel like it's one of them, most people just try to get out of it right away.
I know it's really terrible. Okay. So I think that's been a good conversation about the contact center. It's been an area that's really been revolutionized. I think in the last 12 months, we've moved much faster than we have elsewhere. But another topic that I think is, excuse me?
I was going to say, Bret, before I move on, I do want to say one thing, though. We are so early in this space, and Jason and Susan, you probably see it as well. We're talking about the cutting edge here. Most enterprise folks, when they come in, they just want to hear it talk. Like, when they just want to play with the TTS, they just want to hear the voices. Like, that's usually that's usually the level of sophistication for a lot of folks who are sort of newer to the space. They're not coming in, asking how am I going to, cluster my utterances to find out the right intents and things like that. It usually is a much earlier level, a much less sophisticated level of maturity in enterprise than most people would think. The people who are listening to this podcast are usually on the bleeding edge, not sort of the average folks.
That's true.
Yeah, actually, I just to build on that, like 100%, they don't want to know how the sausage is made. They just want to know how good the sausage is. And there's a lot of those conversations of when you're having with some of those folks of where you're making promises and you're like, I want you to understand how this works because we're very consultative. And it's no, I don't need to know about clustering utterances. That's why we're hiring you. Or that's why we brought you in to help us sort that. And that's an important thing about that's a little bit different when you're dealing with that of it has to be this, how do I explain it in 5 seconds, 5 minutes, and going from there to those who really want to know. And that's something you even think about as we're talking to those audiences or even marketing our services to them.
Totally. It's what Jason said earlier, like businesses when they're coming in, especially when they have a lower sophistication, they're buying solutions. And over time, they can bring those solutions in-house. They can start to build teams and workflows and things around it. But early on, just, here's our problem. I'm buying a solution from you and I'm going to use, an agency or a tool that's just going to do it all for me. I'm not actually looking for how the sausage is made.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've actually seen, and Bret, I know you want to get onto another subject, but we've actually seen a shift. I agree with you. Maybe even 6 or 9 months ago, the novelty of TTS, how natural does it sound? How's it going to feel in the customer experience was a big subject. Our conversations have shifted in the last 6 months to very early dialogue around the NLU model, how you manage it, how important it is to the business. So we're finding that the savviness of the enterprise stakeholder is being elevated. And I think that's just a natural sort of causation of the maturity the technology is having.
Totally.
Yeah, fair enough. And I do want to move on to another one because we have talked about contact center, but I think we're going to come back to it because these themes are actually fairly common. One of the other areas that we've seen a really big uptick in activity is in restaurants. Order taking, could be the drive-through, could be the phone. And there's some similarities to the contact center, which I think a lot of people don't recognize. Contact center, one of the reasons they started putting in IVRs and chatbots is because it's expensive to have people, but also very often you can't get the people you need. And in the restaurant industry, this has become a huge, huge issue. And so one of the things that has been really big this year has been this idea of drive-throughs and then order taking. And it's a kind of a crisis in the restaurant industry that people who left the workforce during the pandemic did not come back necessarily. And they can't staff fully. And it's really fascinating because 2 years ago, what we would have seen was the pitch by conversational AI companies would have been, oh, you can save time, you'll have better customer support, all these other types of things. But now what we're seeing is, oh, if we want to keep the drive-through open, we want to be able to take online orders, then we're going to have to have some sort of automation just to do that. Jason, you want to comment on that because I know you know quite a bit about it.
Yeah, this is funny when we talk to any of our customers and restaurant companies in particular, they ask me, how do we start? And I say the first thing you want to do is write a job description like this is a real person. And the order taker for a restaurant experience, whether it's in person over the counter, whether it's representative in a mobile app or a website, or then of course the standard drive-through experience, it's a very fenced in job description. It's responsible for a very limited amount of function, albeit a very important one in the restaurant space and QSR space, but it's very limited. And so by boxing that in, it becomes a lot easier to manage that in an ongoing way. We talk about the concept of putting together sort of workhorse conversations that are responsible, that you can to some extent set and forget. And this is one of those that screams workhorse to me. The NLU, to Braden's point earlier, the NLU has gotten stronger. The TTS is getting stronger. The understanding, the entity extraction, all of these capabilities are at a point now where when you look at tests that are out there in the market, I believe there's a Popeyes that has been testing this out of one of the southern states, and the customers, when they're interviewed after it, they're completely satisfied. They have no problem with it whatsoever. I think, and this goes into an area that I know Susan and I are both passionate about, which is omni-channel, is because it's technology, because it should be able to be plugged in with our platform. Of course, it is anywhere you want. That experience you get at the drive-through is also the same experience you should be able to get in the mobile app or over the telephone or on a website or even at a kiosk inside the store. And so the restaurants are learning that the technology is advanced enough now that they can actually rely on it, back to our sort of trust conversation earlier around contact centers, that there's very little risk. There's always going to be a human to get involved if the customer decides to go sideways with it. And what that does is it frees up the limited resources that you have to do the more complex things that a bot or an AI element can't do, which is actually prepare the food and deliver it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. I think, one of the key things here is, you just mentioned it, frees up resources to do the higher value things. But the thing is that's driving this, I mean, it's been astounding how quickly the restaurant industry, who was like doing just like little trials a couple years ago and like, oh, this was 10 years away, but we want to be ready 10 years from now. All of a sudden they're flipping switches. I had that picture of Checkers up there. They did 237 stores earlier this year. There's another major quick serve restaurant that's doing 1,000 drive-throughs. And that's captivated people because they're like, oh, the drive-through, isn't that so hard and everything? Converse Now has this. Valiant, there's a lot of companies that are doing really well in this space. But the phone orders, this idea of omni-channel is super important. And it is, I love that idea, Jason, the workhorse products. Like, you just always need to be there. And that's a great place for voice to be there, because it can be there all the time, anytime you need it. What do you think?
Well, I think, oh, sorry, Susan, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the other thing that comes with all of it is the biggest challenge that QSR has always had is accuracy of order. And as this has gotten better, like, that's why they're flipping the switch, because humans are fallible, right? And we're now getting to a point of, I'm not saying that the AI is infallible, but it's a lot easier. And because of the checks and balances of how that stuff works together contextually, of I see it on the board or I see those things, it's getting to a point in, incorrect orders were a drain. When you can start to get those tickets like that, that's where that really helps. And it isn't so much as the upsell. So the better that gets, that's the reason why they're grabbing to it, also because of workforce issues.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah,
Totally.
The upsell that you just mentioned, Susan, in our conversations actually becomes a really big selling point because it ties directly to revenue. Because people that work in QSR, it's either a part-time gig, at best, it's not a career gig. And human beings, typically in some of these sorts of roles, they get uncomfortable trying to sell to people. So at the end of an order, when you're trying to offer the supersized soda or the apple pie add-on, the AI is going to do that every single time. So when you look at the metrics, this goes back to ROI, business use cases, becoming the prevalent conversation point. When you look at the metrics of a fast food restaurant, where only 50% of their employees are offering an upsell, of that 50% are taking advantage of it and opting into it. Well, if you can get that up to 100%, you just made yourself more money. And that equation very quickly pays for the entire program over time. The other thing that in QSR that I think goes overlooked from time to time is the benefit that it can have for the employees inside of the store. And granted, those are very loud, very busy places, but there are, going back to the concept of a workhorse conversation, there are tasks inside of a QSR experience for the employee that can benefit from it. Inventory is one of the things that we're seeing with our customers, is that it typically happens after hours or in a quiet place. Having a mobile app that they're already having to type and log information into, being microphone activated and putting a voice user interface on it, is cutting inventory times down from hours to minutes.
Oh, so you're saying people are using it as essentially for voice data entry for the information in this restaurant.
Right. Yeah. And if you can, and the people that are doing that are typically the managers or above at the restaurant. If you can free up their time more to get back into the real work with their team, you're going to have better customer experience. So it does have a trickle down effect, if you will, of making the entire CX better when you give employees the right tools to be more efficient.
Yeah. We work with a few companies doing automated drive-throughs, and they've actually found that you can essentially handle more orders with the same number of staff, and the staff are less overworked. And so like the actual staff NPS goes up. I think a lot of people always talk about like conversational AI taking jobs. But as Jason said, often it's just taking, instead of you having to take an order at the same time as do another thing or work the cash, whatever it might be. Now you can focus on just doing one job and providing a great customer experience. Well, a lot of the order taking is going to be fulfilled. I did want to add, my brain always goes to workflow, just given we're sort of a collaborative design tool, and so I always think about how do you design these experiences. I think what's interesting with drive-through in particular, it's really one of the most complex like entity extraction sort of design problems. There are just so many entities and modifications to those entities that you have to make, and it is like one of the most challenging conversations you can possibly design, because in a single order you might have like, hey, can I get a combo number 1, and can you remove the fries from it? Okay, so now you need context of combo number 1. I need context. Okay, we're removing the fries from that. Can you add 2 ketchups to it? Like, it gets really crazy really quick. I actually think this is where large language models are going to play a huge factor, because when you think about the amount of logic and business logic you'd have to design 3 or 4 years ago to do an automated drive-through experience, again, it was crazy, and we saw a lot of this stuff. Now you're going to start to be able to say, hey, here's what I need from the user in order to have a successful order. I need, item A, B, and C. I just need to know, how they're paying. I need to know where they're going to pick up, et cetera, et cetera. And then just fill in the blanks, right? Be able to handle all the fallbacks, be able to handle all the sort of small talk to get to these objective states. And that's what a lot of these large language models and generative AI are going to be able to bring. And so I think you're going to see an explosion of like, not even just drive-throughs, but any sort of conversational AI that requires a ton of entity extraction. So commerce is another good example. You're going to start to see that really, really explode, because the cost to create these experiences is going down dramatically, because it was really, really hard a couple of years ago, and it's still extremely hard, but it's going to get a lot easier.
Yeah, great. Okay, so I want to switch over to another topic, and that is automotive. And automotive has been really interesting. It was one of the first places we saw voice in the car. This goes back to actually a 2000 model year car, 1999. I think it was when it was actually late 1999 was the first time it debuted. And it was really just a voice control type of thing. You could do a few things in the car until recently. And it became more conversational. You could still do things in the car. And then they started saying outside the car things. So while you're driving, you can have access to your digital services outside the car. So that was a revolution that we've seen over the last few years. Over the past year, we're starting to look at the driver experience extending beyond the car. And we have the Sirens example up here, but there's many others. And this one is this idea that your car can be helpful in a lot of ways as you're outside the car. Maybe you're just controlling the car, but we see other things, and maybe Jason, you can jump in on this one first, because I talked to Sankit from Volkswagen about this a few months ago, and it was really interesting because like the driving experience doesn't end with shutting the car door and walking into the house.
Yeah, I mean, we're all consumers and probably all vehicle owners, and we depend on them pretty heavily. And they're becoming more and more complex. There's a lot of elements to know and manage about them, and they're pivotal to our lifestyles. So the idea that you're only worried about your car when you're in your car it's nonsense at this point. And that's what VW realized, and why they employed our platform to build out their ID3 and ID4 system in their mobile application, because the relationship that Volkswagen wants to have with their customer is far beyond what's inside the 4 doors or 2 doors of the vehicle. And as the vehicle is becoming more complex and takes on more responsibility for customer experience or lifestyle experience in general, having access to that well outside of the vehicle becomes really important to them. So it is accessing other digital services that they may be partnered with. And I think we'll see more and more of these partnerships, not that we're short on them today anyway, but we'll see more and more of these sort of digital product partnerships where people are playing nicely together to allow information to traverse different systems. But they really wanted to also put the access to the vehicle and the brand information in the hands of the person wherever they wanted it to be. And that's as simple as understanding what your charge is on your vehicle, because these ID3s and 4s are electric vehicles. When you're going to sleep at night and you've got your phone with you, to planning routes, to understanding when service is required, making those appointments. They really took a holistic look, even voicifying, if you will, the owner's manual, which I think is a tremendous use case in this space. I just recently got a different vehicle, and they didn't even give me an owner's manual. I had to go online to get it. Well, and I went online and opened up the PDF. It was like 600 pages, you know?
That is horrible.
I'm not reading 600 pages of an owner's manual. I want to know what the tire pressure should be when I want to know what the tire pressure should be wherever I need to know it. Yeah. And thankfully, I can actually ask the assistant that they have for information like that. But I think Automotive is getting smarter about this. But they have such, from a product standpoint, they have such a long lead time, right? They're making decisions today about products that will be in the market 3, 4, 5 years from now. So I think if you could normalize that sort of core product generation that Braden's talking about against when it was going to be deployed, I think you probably see that Automotive is well ahead of the curve, but the general consumer isn't going to see that for a few years.
Yeah, fair enough. How about you, Braden? You see people building for the car using your design tools. What do you think's changing in that space?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jason said it best in that it's just becoming a more integrated part of your life, right? So, you're now starting to see a lot of the core use cases at this point have been designed, and they're going to continue to iterate on those, right? However, now you're starting to say, okay, hold up. Well, how can we actually play nicely with the rest of the apps that are, in their pocket today and bring those into the car, right? So is that going to be connecting to their financial service provider? Is that going to be, connecting to music, whatever it might be? It's really just starting to build a bit of an app ecosystem that's running in your car, and it's specifically made for voice, because you can't just turn a mobile app and suddenly add a voice input, and boom, that's just not going to be a good conversation nor a safe one if you want to make sure the person's fully sort of focused at the wheel. And so you're seeing that sort of voicification, as Jason said, of all the apps in your pocket, just bringing that to the car. That's really what we're seeing, but often what you have in the car today, given that lead time, folks are planning a couple years out. So I think that's quite interesting.
What do you think, Susan?
Well, I mean, it's interesting for us because, again, we don't have any specific manufacturer clients that we work with, but we are still working with clients who are using the time in car. And voice it has to be part of it because it has to be safe. So how do you, like you said, how do you make that right? How is it the right information, and how can we be prepared for the questions that are being asked? And am I helping someone field enablement who may or may be driving in the middle of literally fields and not having a good connection? How do we keep that working? And then how do we still deliver that so that they can actually be able to use it in a way that it makes sense to them? And that it's not necessarily, it's about, getting stuff done, not necessarily about being all things to all pieces. So there are things that we're looking at it from that perspective of, do I use their drive time to be a time when I can start to help someone log things, or that they know where they're going next from an efficiency standpoint? They're focused on going from A to B and they don't have to stop and pause. So how do we make those more efficient and safer? We see that especially this time of year with delivery trucks everywhere. Where are you going next? How are we tracking that and stuff like that? So absolutely.
I've had a few conversations with sort of auto execs where one of the how they're thinking about the car moving forward with the development of AV, like autonomous vehicles, is essentially recreating like the living room experience in your car, right? So suddenly, a lot of the applications today for these voice assistants are very, it's centered around driving, which makes sense, right? That's what you use a car for. But as suddenly it's no longer about driving, it's no longer about navigation. Suddenly now it's about, actually, hold up, you have 2 hours to kill while you're in the car. Now let's actually turn this into like an entertainment platform per se. What would the experience look like then? And so you are starting to see some of like the R&D teams, certainly not, the core platform teams just yet, work on that in mind. But you do have a lot of the large auto OEMs have that same sort of shared vision in mind. It's a living room on wheels, right? What does the world look like at that point? And what's the voice assistant that would be needed?
Absolutely. Okay, so I want to transition to media, and maybe we'll start with you, Susan. Media has been one of the great use cases for voice from a consumer standpoint. And that's led a lot of enterprises to start to deploy voice assistants. In some cases, those are custom voice assistants. And actually, this is Odyssey. I know, Jason, you worked on this, but I want to hear from Susan first, because I know you know the space. Tell us a little bit about what you think about the media use case and where that's headed.
Yeah, I think the what's interesting is we're working on a project right now that is actually helping an enterprise be able to start to dip their toe into how do we marry media to those interactive ideas of where do we drive them instead of to a website, where do we drive them to so they can, again, quite honestly, they're on the go. They might be in their car or they might be at a sporting event. How do we make it possible that they don't have to wait till they get home? And so that's kind of where we're seeing of how can I make a nice closed, tidy little unit that then I can put in to direct them where I want them to go, give them the information they need. But I can use basically my ad time to talk about core props and then push them for more information right then and there. And I'm not making them make a phone call. I'm just letting them continue that experience. That's one of the things we're seeing. We're also seeing in the ubiquitous things of like with avatar themes, that recent project of how do we drive more interest? How do we dial into fandom to be able to drive ticket sales? How do we drive people to another place? And rather than it always being in, say, on TV and making it visual, there's 90 million of these little devices. Let's capitalize on that. So there's different places where we're seeing media, but a lot of it is about you can talk to it. And so it's ceasing to be, we always knew that media was moving away from disruptive now, and then it was moving more into that inclusive. Now it's moving into that conversational of it's a back and forth. Tell me what you want to know about this when we're done. And that's the super exciting part of it, of being able to control the dialogue even after, so to speak, that little ad buy's over.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of the media then is becoming much more of an experience. You could say it was an experience before, but it was mostly a lean back experience. They were broadcasting to you, you were taking it in, and that was it. And we've seen some amazing things over the last 5 years around, you mentioned fandom, basically servicing those super fans, creating a more immersive experience, and thinking about some of these franchises, not just as the projection franchise, here's a story, we're pushing it to you, but then adding all these interactive elements.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's what makes it richer, that makes it ownable. And then that's kind of what hooks them for life, quite frankly. And it becomes theirs because people want to belong. They're proud of how they do. And that's the other part of it too. If we're able to build community and connect people, that sometime as well, that also comes on with these voice, there's voice chat moderation things that Otto talks about over at Speechly, but there's even just in general, can I connect one person to another person, share information or those things. You don't even need a customer service rep because I have, say, a seasoned veteran brand loyalist who can probably talk more about a product better. So it is, how do we tap into that? Or how do I tap someone into an older engineer talking to a new engineer? So again, that field help is there. So that's right there, because customer service isn't just, company to customer. It's also within the rank and file of how do we, again, break down those silos.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, Jason, let's talk about this for a moment. If we think about and we'll pull this up here, right there. If you think about, what you did with Odyssey, this is about it being more than an experience. This is about basically media as a product. And then how do you add features to make that product more interesting and maybe more immersive in this case?
The overarching theme for any enterprise is how much of the customer's lifestyle do you want to take responsibility for? You can just be a product company and do it very well and be successful, and that's fine. But when you trying to escalate the fandom, lifetime customer value, affinity, these things require you to think outside of just exactly what you're doing. And that's what Odyssey did. They decided to start, and we see other media companies doing it too. Some of them are our customers, where a voice user interface is the natural place to start. Find me this, play me this, add to this, blah, blah, blah. But where media companies are leaning and emerging into is the idea of taking on the burden, if you will, of customer experience, of reducing friction and creating a greater sense of ease for what's happening inside of their ecosystem. So to a lot of what Susan said, if you're listening to an advertisement where Dunkin' Donuts is going to give you a 10% coupon, why are you now demanding that the listener go to a website to get the coupon? Why isn't the assistant in the listening application downloading that coupon to your digital wallet since you're streaming it from your phone?
Mhm.
I mean, it's just, if you get a prompt to be able to order something to pick up at the nearest location, why isn't the assistant then offering you to put directions into your Google Maps, which is right there on the same device? There's a sense of opportunity that voice user interface and conversational AI brings to nearly any industry, not least of which is media, to heighten that experience. At the end of the day, media companies want to keep you listening or watching longer than you did yesterday. When you negate reasons they have to leave paying attention to you, they necessarily stay longer. So at the end of the day, it's still an attention economy. We're still playing for the attention of the user, and we're realizing that voice user interface conversational AI keeps attention where we want it as the enterprise, which is with us.
Well, and just to like build on that too, one of the things that we've talked about many years, Braden and I have been talking about this for years, but this idea of custom assistants.
Mhm.
And, if we think about like what Odyssey did, what a lot of other folks have been doing in the media space, even like down to televisions, like Vizio just did a custom assistant. It's this new user interface, and beyond media, I think the story of custom assistants is maybe getting lost, even though I see like there's new custom assistants coming out all the time, and I know you are as well. What do you think about this idea of custom assistants? Is the enterprise more likely to see this as, oh, of course, this technology is ready for prime time, we can use this now? Are they still in POC mode? And when they are thinking about it, are they thinking about, hey, I'm going to do this now, or this is something I'm definitely going to do, but later, or maybe I'll do it?
As a platform that needs to constantly go find new customers to leverage our platform to do things with, I have to try to read the room pretty quickly and pretty well. And the term custom assistant can be frightening to a lot of senior executives because it feels like you need to own a lot. And so we've diversified our language around this. You heard me say voice user interface earlier. The voice UI is the sort of gateway drug to conversational AI. And it's not scary. It maps against functionality that already exists. There's easy ways to implement it and to scale up, especially with platforms like ours. And so what we're seeing in the enterprise space is whether or not they want to call it a custom assistant, that's what they're getting into. Whether or not they're doing it day 1 or day 100 or day 1,000, they will lean into it. And that's where platforms that aren't necessarily point solutions are going to Braden's point, when that consolidation happens in automotive or QSR or whatnot, the platforms that offer scalability and efficiency of management and aren't boxing people into that black box that they thought there was solution is what's going to allow the enterprise to achieve success time and time again over a long period of time.
Yeah, I think custom always, unfortunately, sounds expensive. I think that's what, that's what we've always taught, right? If we say custom, I found that saying owned assistant also is a helpful way of making that feel a little more in control. And to echo exactly like Jason, it's also about if I'm giving any ground to another assistant, I see the affinity that happens or the emotional attachment. Why would I not dial into that and then make that into a centralized system or system persona or assistant that doesn't live within one space?
Right.
And that's again where the omni-channel comes in. It's just so much easier to unify and point roads, or at least signal this is all one part of one happy family. And I think that's where that comes into play big time.
I think it's funny. It's like, a custom assistance ultimately is a perspective. It's not actually you can't really point to it, right? Like every company, or at least most big companies, have an IVR and they have a chatbot, right? And before maybe they viewed the channel as sort of the solution, but when you really just go up a layer, you realize that, hold up, I have an assistant. It's just spread across my IVR and my SMS and my web chat, whatever it might be. And so I think it's really just a perspective change. Owned assistants are already out there. They just live across a bunch of different channels. And I think, really our viewpoint on this is we're kind of leaving the almost like the Netscape era of assistants where Alexa and Google were sort of the dominant assistants everyone knew about, and we thought of them as assistants, right? Like they're sort of these big things, and we typically thought about like the web chat bots on your site. That's a chat bot, and Alexa's an assistant. With the Alexa and sort of Google era, and I still think it's going to continue to go on, but that's a whole different discussion. I think it's just going to be different. Those big companies invited you to build within their walled garden. You came in, you build an Alexa skill, and that was your assistant lived within their assistant. I now think we're entering sort of like almost like the web 2.0 of assistants, where hold up, every company will have its own assistant. Those assistants will be able to talk to each other, and eventually, you'll have a personal assistant that can interface with the company's assistants, right? And so it's entering more of a, the model that we see with the internet, where you are responsible for exposing your company's information to sort of, the assistant web and or whatever we want to call it. And it's just ultimately it's another channel to interface with customers. So that's kind of how we think about it. Ultimately, every company has a custom assistant already. It's just whether you call it that or not.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. We think that the custom assistants, the owned assistants are a big deal. And they are actually, because one of the things I saw this year in particular was it's really part of the product experience now. It's just a feature that they're adding. And one of the key changes has been it doesn't always have to be conversational. And I have this theory that we basically skipped a UI cycle by going to the conversational assistant, and that we had touch and swipe and people were familiar with that. The next logical thing would have been voice command and control. But then we went full conversational in sort of the consumer space. And that didn't actually fit the use cases that a lot of consumers needed at that point. And so what did we see? They were using these very powerful conversational assistants to do command and control interface. And so 9 of the top 10 use cases on smart speakers are command and control. And you see this in the car as well. You see this on the phone. It's like almost all of them don't require a conversation every once in a while. At the same time, so we have that. So like command and control is like hot right now because we sort of skipped that. So people are like, oh, wait a sec, we can still get usefulness here. And you think of like Bank of America's Erica is really a command and control assistant. It doesn't even talk back to you, right? You can't have a conversation with it. It'll send you some chat, if it doesn't understand. So I think that's one thing. I think this idea that it's becoming just this feature that people can bake into the product is a really important step. That it's not something that's pure novelty. I think, Jason, as you said earlier, that it's something that's like, oh, this is something that can be helpful to the user. And as you said, also remove the reason for them to like take their eyes off of us.
Yeah, completely. And listen, it's not just media companies. Every brand is in the attention economy. You have to keep your customers' attention. They have to be thinking about you. It's just the nature of capitalism. We're just, as consumers, we're getting more savvy to it. So again, driving to that, building tools that reduces friction, that creates an ease of use, that provides benefit to the customer. It's a no-brainer. The brands that are doing it, even experimentally, are seeing big rewards early on. They're doubling down on it. I mean, Bank of America is a huge company. They spent, I think, what was it, $100 million on Erica to date with a team of 90 or 100 employees.
Yeah.
That's not experimental. That's to Braden's point. That's core product. And we live in a world as brands, as companies, that when consumers see something and expect something, even with a brand that's not part of our competitive space, they very quickly learn to expect it in our space.
That's right.
So we have to be paying attention to not just what's happening around us, but what's happening across the entire sort of lifestyle of the consumers that we serve.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about another key trend that has really dominated discussion. I think we would say the last few weeks in our industry. And this has to do with large language models, as manifested most recently by ChatGPT. And I think there's a really interesting conversation for us to have here. So first of all, it's great. The GPT-3, when it came out in 2020, did these great party tricks, right? It was like, oh, I never knew that a language model could do that. right? So they could write poetry, they could do some basic HTML programming. And then later on, people said, oh, wait a second, there's a lot of really good applications here. So OpenAI had the Codex, Microsoft, GitHub created Copilot to help you help you code more efficiently, significantly more efficiently. And there's something that's really happening here, which I think is interesting. And ChatGPT is just the most recent example of it. I didn't really think that it was going to happen this quickly. I thought we were another year away from this type of interface that just sparked everybody's imagination and came back to it. But it's starting to get to this production quality level at this point. The other thing that's happening is what it's enabled is a new type of assistant. Now, is GTP3 an assistant? There's a whole nother conversation around this. Let's just talk about this idea of the assistant that's across the table from you, Alexa, Google Assistant. You say, you ask it to do something, it does something for you. Could be Bank of America's Erica, the same thing. We now have this idea of these expert assistants, these collaborators across a number of professional categories that are sitting beside you. And ChatGPT like captured people's experience. It's not really that, but the underlying technology behind it, particularly GTP 3.5, is enabling things like Spellbook, which is this contract writing assistant, which works with a lawyer to write a better contract, to analyze a contract. We think about all sorts of tools in this space where they're doing things for you as opposed to across the table from you. So I'm interested in finding out what you all think in terms of when this is going to arrive in the enterprise. Is it already there? Is it about to be there? And when it hits the enterprise, are we going to see it more in terms of low risk areas? Or are we going to see it in terms of things where maybe there's a higher perceived risk, and what time frame? I think maybe Braden, you can start off on this one.
Yeah, I mean, this has been we've been just thinking about this a ton and sort of working with customers to try to sharpen our understanding here. There are so many different ways we kind of take this conversation. One is like the implication of just large language models in general. And I'm not going to go into it. I was going to leave everyone with a thought of like, when the cost of automation goes to zero, like what happens, right? Because that's ultimately kind of where large language models go, which is what gets really exciting. I think when it comes to the enterprise, we work with quite a few of the largest enterprises now at this point, well over 400 customers. And what we're hearing is it's really cool. It's certainly the future, but not right now. At least when it comes to the enterprise. And the reason for that is largely around observability. You spend 100 years to build a brand that people love and customers really trust, and to hand your brand off to a black box is just it's not a risk that enterprises are willing to take. However, that's at runtime. Right. So that's actually, having the runtime application running on these large language models. What gets really exciting is when you start to apply large language models to the creation layer. So suddenly the observability is no longer a problem. Now your conversation designer can do 10 times the work. And this is what I was sort of my first point. It's going to bring the cost of assistant creation down by orders of magnitude over time. Suddenly translation's easier, being able to write copy is easier, being able to have better variations for your conversation design is easier. Automated testing. So for example, being able to actually have ChatGPT actually act as a user testing persona and run through your assistant. The amount of use cases it unlocks is tremendous, but it's not the ones that people are thinking about. People are thinking that this is going to be like the model in production, but I don't think that's going to be the case. It's going to be all on the creation side for the next couple of years at the enterprise level. Now, when it does get to runtime, I think you're going to basically see a 4-layer model. And this is how we're thinking about this at Voiceflow is you're going to have these large language models, which everyone's going to have access to. It's going to be OpenAI. It'll be a Cohere. It'll be, there's a whole bunch of them, and certainly sort of the big vendors. Think about that as like the knowledge of the world, right? So like, let's imagine you're training like a Starbucks barista. The benefit of hiring a human is they just come with knowledge of the world. And that's what's been missing in conversational AI. And it's what allows for really fluid conversations, because you might go off the beaten path, but because I'm a human and I have life experience, I can actually take that conversation and apply it to my business outcome, right? That's what's been missing in conversational AI. And so that's really exciting. So, but the problem is if you just have a large language model, it doesn't know how to work with your business per se. And so that's where you're going to start to see language models trained on your knowledge base. That's kind of layer 2. So most companies, in our opinion, are going to have a large language model that is the knowledge of the world, and then the knowledge of your company, right? That's sort of a layer on top. Those two then need to pair with a dialogue manager, which is like, okay, well, great. You know how to work at Starbucks. You have knowledge of the world to be able to have a conversation. What's your goal, right? Because these AIs are not conscious, and so you ultimately do need to have like a level of prompt engineering and a level of like what is the actual business objective. That's great. You have those 3, and then lastly is over time you start to learn your customers' preferences. You know, if you're a Starbucks barista, same customer comes in week after week, you start to learn their order. You start to specialize. So that's the framework that we're thinking about at Voiceflow when it comes to large language models. You've got 4 layers. Large language model that'd be fairly open, one that's trained to your company's specific knowledge base, one that's trained to the customer, and one that's ultimately giving the objectives. Bit of a rant there, but as you can tell, we're pretty excited about the cost of creation coming down on assistants.
Yeah, I'll add a layer. I think the top layer is actually the UI, how it manifests. But I think all those things make sense to me. Susan, you've given some thought to this. What would you say?
I mean, I think from a creation standpoint, there's a lot of things that come into play here that are exciting. The other thing that I just like what we're hearing is a lot of it also is, okay, it's neato. It's super cool, super impressive. But what am I doing this in a business case? Like, it's great that I can do a mashup of Taylor Swift and Ozzy Osbourne writing a song. What does that really mean for like actual dollars and cents? But on the same side, we've seen time and time again in a lot of our research, and even a pattern, and I talked about this at Voice, is this whole idea of mindset shifts of audiences and of users, and how you move from cynical of why would I want to use that to how did I live without it? And right now I see this as kind of that interim. After you go from cynical, you go into novelty of, I'll kick its tires. And that's where then, we see this happening. What happens after that is exploration before then we get into full on like integration into your life. That's where this is an exciting time, because right now, all those folks who we were talking to about AI, as we were just talking about not sausage making, we're like, AI is this thing, it's HAL, it's whatever. Now we have this, like, no, this is how this works. This is a way that it can help. The other part of it too, is it does facilitate big time being able to write that poor first draft of anything we do. You're getting to that. I think the important thing to keep in mind is a lot of times with these technology advancements, it's not, I'm going to replace a human, it's human plus. That's where we see the most dividends. And I think that's where this is going to be exciting. I mean, we were just talking about, and I was, Emerson doing the cookbook recipes. Cause I mean, we all sat there and said, I wonder if they're any good though, or is this accurate? Is this, as that gets stronger, that's also going to be something that comes into there. But right now it's okay. Again, like you said, we're forgiving because we're in novelty. When we get to another phase, that's not going to be as forgivable. So this is a great time for us to kind of also see how everyone's going to bang on it, so we can then continue to make sure that we're thinking through all of those little bits.
I should give some context here. You mentioned the cookbook. Yes. So this was a little experiment we did on the Synthedia team, which is what the publication we use for synthetic media specifically, although we do cover the topic in Voicebot as well. Because there's been such a advance, particularly in text to image and then text to text large language models, we said, geez, ChatGPT is so good. DALL-E, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, they're so good. What could we do in an hour? And so we had this idea. Okay, well, let's say we wanted to create a cookbook with 3 recipes, and we basically set aside some time where we could spend, it's 8 minutes to define, like, we chose the recipes, we figured out the backstory, because every good cookbook has a backstory about how my grandmother passed this recipe down. So we did a little backstory for each of the recipes, and it just overall, and said, okay, here's a meal. And so then we generated everything. We gave ourselves about 20 minutes for that, a couple updates, and then we did a half hour for layout. And so if people want to find that, you can find that in Voicebot.ai and see what it looks like. But you mentioned Emerson actually went and made them. And so we put a little disclaimer in there. It's like, this is unedited from ChatGPT. So, use it at your own risk, but it looks kind of like a cookbook. If we'd been able to spend 3 more hours in layout, it would have really looked like a cookbook, because that was the thing that took more time. But we basically needed less than 10 minutes of ideation, 20 minutes of creation, and then the rest of the time we could have spent on layout. It's a completely different world we're dealing with, Jason.
It is, and I think it goes back to that old adage, which is it's easier to revise than it is to create. And so we have a tool now that's going to help us create. And everything that Susan and Braden and you, Bret, have said, I can give you a real world example with our platform when we're obviously playing with it just like everybody is. And the primary benefit so far that we're arriving at through our integrations is exactly what you guys are describing. There is a step of curation that will absolutely have to happen for the foreseeable future with anything that ChatGPT or similar tools create, because there's too much risk, there's too much legality. We live in a litigious society. I mean, even the screen you had up earlier, Bret, I noticed on the far right hand side, one of the call outs was may give bad or harmful advice. That's not a disclaimer that
there you go, over here on the right hand side.
Right. So we're not ready for runtime, as Braden put it. I completely agree with that. There are uses. I'm suspicious that there may be a bit of a blowback in our space in terms of expectations management from the enterprise about what is actually possible versus what the level of effort is to do it. This will get us further collectively as a space, further faster. But, to people that don't understand the ins and outs, sometimes beautiful means simple, means easy.
Totally. I think the best thing that ChatGPT has done for our space is get everyone excited about our space. Like that's probably like the most, it had 1 million users in like 5 days, right? We haven't had as much interest in conversational AI and showing how good the experiences can be. Because honestly, 99% of IVRs and chatbots are just not very good, right? And so this is the first time that everyone in mass scale has, that was actually pretty cool. It gets people starting to think and go, maybe we actually can create better experiences. And it's funny because over the past couple of years, if you put together a team, you had a great platform, had conversation designers, like whatever, you could create great experiences. But this is the first time in mass that people are now experiencing conversational AI in a different way. And, I live in San Francisco, and the amount of founders now who are looking at this space and going, holy, can I create a conversational assistant for this or this or this? It's really starting to get people's gears turning, which is exciting. And I think, the anecdote I like best here is, when the cost of flying came down, right? It's not like, airlines made less money. People just flew more places, right? And so suddenly we're going to start to see assistance. If it costs $100 million for Erica to be created, if that can come down to 10, and that'd be a huge, huge efficiency increase. If that can come down even lower than 10, suddenly you're going to start to see assistance pop up for tons of use cases. And we're not going to see less conversation designers. We're not going to see less conversational AI teams. We're just going to see the impact that a single conversation designer or agency or whoever it might be can have is going to increase by an order of magnitude.
Yeah, fair enough. Go ahead.
Well, and it's going to give context. Like that's the really exciting thing of when we talk about the idea of context of if it can be aware from those things of, am I talking to you? Are you typing to me? Where are you? What interface? What is that? That's where then you really can get what is like, for me, personalization is relevance. Totally. And that's where we can start to play. The one thing I feel like I wouldn't be a good content professional if I didn't put an asterisk of please don't ever, unless you're doing an exercise, like throw that stuff right out there because it does. It's formulaic. It has all of those things from an editorial standpoint. There's lots of things that need to be fixed. I've actually seen people who are like, I can just publish it. No, don't. Please don't. But it's an amazing starting place. Like you said, it's easier to revise and create. Absolutely 100%, Jason.
Totally. I think I want to quickly add, I was trying about the drive-through design experience. This is all I think about all day is like how to design great conversations. If you're trying to collect like 3 entities, you need to have like 8 prompts, right? It basically goes exponential for how many different entities. Because let's say there's 3 things you need to collect, A, B, and C. You need to have a good prompt for A plus B, A plus C, only get A, B, and C. Like it gets really crazy really quick. Suddenly, the conversation designer might not have to think about the individual prompts for each one of these entities and the different combinations, and they can focus on the persona of the assistant. They can start to focus on how is this experience going to feel like, generate a decision table of all 8 prompts. And I'm quickly just going to look through them, make sure they're all, kosher, they match our persona guide, and boom, like instead of having to write 8 things, it took me the time of, only writing 1. And so it's going to enable, a lot of these like really high entity extraction use cases that have just a ton of stuff you have to collect to be created way, way, way faster. And potentially eventually at runtime, I think that's actually one of the use cases where runtime you might actually start to see it bleed in is things like drive-through a little bit earlier on than other a little bit more contextual use cases. Contextual to the company, I should say.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, so it is super exciting. I think we've got a lot of other things around ChatGPT and large language models, AI 21. There's several of them out there. Google Lambda also very, very capable. So people who are watching, if you haven't played with these, I'd recommend you do, just because I think you're going to be also impressed, but also be conversant in it. And I think you maybe hit the nail on the head. It got people thinking again around interesting use cases. So we just talked for almost an hour about the technology as it stands. People have figured out how to get value out of it today. And that's a key trend. But then, like, we've also talked about the idea that, like, people just, our customers, the enterprises, they just want to use it for the things they know it can do. And if we think about large language models, a lot of times that's starting to spark that idea factory again to say, oh, this is what it could be. There's something else we could do. And I think that's going to be great for everyone. Now, we've talked for a long time. We're going to have to bring this to an end. And so what I would like to do is just a really quick round robin. We'll start with you, Braden, go to Jason, and then Susan. Braden, why don't you tell people how they can learn more about Voiceflow, and tell me one thing you're looking forward to in 2023.
Oh boy. So yeah, you can find Voiceflow, voiceflow.com, a pretty easy domain there. I feel like I'm just, continuing to be on the large language model train, but I just think it's so exciting. So I'm looking forward to see more advancements there. Because again, I think it's going to bring down the cost of creation, which is amazing for everything. It's going to be amazing for the industry, amazing for conversation designers, for businesses. So that's what I'm excited for.
Jason.
Voicify, single end-to-end conversational platform. You can find us at voicify.com. And I think in 2023, the thing that I'm most excited about is results with our customers. They've spent a lot of time in 2022 building, concepting, testing. A lot of things are going to come to life in 2023, and I'm just confident and excited that the ROI models that they put together for this space are going to come to fruition for them.
Susan.
So Vixen Labs, your voice partner, conversational AI, and we're at vixenlabs.co. I think what I'm really excited about is we do have some exciting things coming forward. We'll be excited about the 2023 VCI as we always do. But I think from an enterprise perspective, I'm excited to see how more and more we're seeing the inside match the outside of being able to get the experience that they're putting on the outside is mirroring more, so that we're getting more of, I guess, authentic consistency, if I can string together two horrible buzzwords together. But that whole idea of how we're talking about things outside is how we're talking about them inside, because of the conversational dots that are being connected. That's what I'm most excited about seeing in 2023.
Absolutely. Well, and aren't you excited about your book coming out?
Oh, yes. I should have worked that in. Yeah. We sent the manuscript out, so it's like out of my mind. That's really bad. But yes, and in 2023, our voice marketing book will be coming out, which will also be incredibly exciting because we have a lot more case studies and some really great perspectives that are in there. A couple of contributors here today. So it's really excited to get that out.
Super. Yeah. I'm really excited for something in the first quarter too. Andrew, Eric, and I have been doing a lot of benchmarking of text-to-image models and the large language models, head-to-head comparisons, just to give people a sense of, like, how are they different? What are they good at? Those types of things. And I don't know of anybody that's actually taken the time to actually do a structured analysis of each. So those will be out in actually just a few weeks. Might be out by the time you watch this. So you should definitely check those out at Voicebot.ai or through Synthedia. And I'm Bret Kinsella. I'm the founder of Voicebot.ai, also the founder of Synthedia. Check out our stuff. We do a lot of really interesting things beyond the podcast. Since you're here watching the video, like and subscribe. We actually published over 60 videos this past year. And in previous years, we hadn't even done that many because we saw there was this gap. There were certain types of things that we needed video to help educate the industry on, drive more engagement, those types of things, all these things that we talk about. So there's a lot of really good stuff in there. And actually, Jason's in more than one of those, I think. So you can check out Jason Fields talking to me about voice strategy in at least one of the conversations. So thank you, everybody. This has been another great year in review. Braden, Jason, Susan, I look forward to talking to you next year, and we'll see if the things you're looking forward to actually fulfill your expectations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bret. Appreciate it.
All right, everyone. Bye-bye.